So today the goal is to talk about the election of 1800. We're just getting ready to start chapter 10. I think I went over with you before our ultimate goal. We finish chapter 9. We skipped a couple of things, so eventually I'll go back into your study guide and I'll tell you, cross this off, you don't need this, we won't test over this. We'll do chapter 10, most of it. There might be a couple of things I skip over, but it's actually a pretty good chapter. And then we'll get started in chapter 11, but we won't finish chapter 11 before Christmas break. I will test over wherever we get to. So I'll take my chapter 9, 10, 11 tests that I've already created, and if there's stuff we don't get to, I'll take those questions off. If there's stuff on your study guide that we don't get to, I'll have you cross those things off too. So later on, when we get closer to finish, we'll do that. You'll have 4 grades left. This Otis assessment, that's 6 points, that's due tomorrow. For the Thursday people, that's due Monday. I guess for you guys, it's due Friday. You should be able to get it done in class today, but you can do it multiple times. So if you don't like your score, go in later and work on it some more. You'll have the study guide, which will ultimately be a grade. I feel like there's one other one that I'm going to grade. Oh yeah, and then there's a chapter 12 worksheet. We won't finish 11, but we will get through 12 because it's like a 20-minute worksheet. So I'll give it either as homework or one day during class, depending on what our schedule looks like. And then the chapter 9, 10, 11 test, which will be about a normal size test. So be paying attention to your grades. Know kind of where you're at. If you're on the edge of an AB or a BC, and you know you have to do really well on the test, make sure you do what you need to do really well. Some of you have really solid grades and you could probably get a C on the test and still have an A in my class. Not all of you are in that situation. So we're going to talk about the election of 1800, which is a fun one to talk about because there's a lot of goony stuff that happens as a result of the election of 1800, and maybe even a few parallels we can make with the election of 2020. Then we're going to look at how we develop a little bit more westward expansion with the Louisiana Purchase, and we'll get started briefly talking about Lewis and Clark and their expedition. We'll talk about very much of it, but we'll briefly get started. And then when we're finished with that, you've got some homework. So about 55 minutes of class time and then some homework time. And you guys are going to shut me down at about the right time if I'm still yapping. Last period, when I recorded it the first time for my Thursday people, I went 55 minutes and 27 seconds without anybody telling me where I was at. So I was actually pretty satisfied with that. I was happy. So if you would, there is a set of fill-in notes for chapter 10. If you would go there, please. I got to do some backing up. Obviously, I didn't have this set up and ready to go. We got quite a ways, but the fill-in notes are very simple. So chapter 10 is called the Jefferson era, which means Thomas Jefferson's taken over. Remember, this guy's been kind of a big dog for a while. He's the guy that wrote most of the Declaration of Independence, so he was already acknowledged as probably one of, if not the smartest men. He had already served as a vice president to John Adams, and then in the election of 1800, he runs against John Adams. So the whole idea of political parties, they were opposite political parties, but they didn't necessarily hate each other. Adams and Jefferson were besties for a while, and then they hated each other. And then they got over it 20 years later and were besties again. So they have kind of a cool relationship. But that would be really strange today to think about a vice president taking on the president because they're of the same political party. So we would probably rarely, if ever, see a Mike Pence taking on a Donald Trump. That wouldn't make a whole lot of sense because they're the same. But if we went by the old system where the winner is president and second place is vice president, do you think if Hillary Clinton was vice president, there's potential that she would have taken on Donald Trump to win the presidency in 2020? Yeah, that's much more likely to happen. Or if Joe Biden wins 2020 and Donald Trump is the vice president because he got second place, could you see him re-challenging in 2024? Absolutely. In fact, that's a possibility to happen anyway. So we're looking at a time period beyond Jefferson's presidency because he has a bigger impact than just the years that he's president. Most presidents do, and I'll explain some of that today too. So will feel the effects, positive or negative, depending on your opinion, of Donald Trump's presidency for years to come, maybe even decades to come. That's the power of the president. So we'll take a look at the Jefferson era. Here's the thing. Election of 1800 is John Adams versus Thomas Jefferson. President versus vice president. It's like a boxing match. Here's the results of the election. Houston, we have a problem. Actually, two problems. I'll give you a minute to write, but then I'm going to expect someone to figure out what the problem is with the election of 1800. It's kind of obvious-ish. Nikki, what's going on here? What's the problem?
There's another person running.
There's three candidates. We got Thomas Jefferson, John Adams, and Aaron Burr. Now, probably, unless you've watched the musical Hamilton, thank you. My brain went completely blank. Sometimes that happens. Unless you've watched the musical Hamilton, you've probably never heard of Aaron Burr before. So what does that tell us about the outcome here? Right?
There's going to be another thing. Another vote.
Another vote? So let's just re-vote? That's a good guess.
No.
Does Burr win?
No.
How do you know? I haven't gone to the next slide yet. Because you've never heard of him before. If he would have won, then he'd be up there on our list of presidents, and even if you don't know all the presidents, you would have heard of him. So we know he loses. For sure, John Adams is out. But we have a tie. You can't have a tie, Mr. Bellamy. That's ridiculous. Actually, some of the scenarios that were possible in the election of 2020 showed that it was potential that we could have had a tie between Donald Trump and Joe Biden. So our founding fathers, as brilliant as they were, they actually took into consideration that it was possible to have a tie. It seems like it'd be such a statistical minority, such a small possibility to have a tie that it wouldn't even be a concern. But it is, and it has happened a couple of times. And in the instance of a tie, the tiebreaker is very simple. Rock, paper, scissors, 2 out of 3. It's in the Constitution. Just kidding. It's not a thing. But it should be, right? Isn't that the fairest, easiest way to break all time? Really?
Yep.
Yes.
It seems fair. The only thing is, like, if it was rock, paper, scissors versus me, I've never been beat.
Really?
So you wouldn't have a chance. I'm like National World Ultimate Galaxy Champion. Rock, paper, scissors.
Yeah. Okay.
We would, but we're recording, so we can't do it.
So?
Just do it anyway.
Friday, Blythe, so I'll
No.
give you a little time
No.
to practice.
I'll take
Are you scared?
2 seconds. Ready?
Yeah, you're
Blythe?
gonna lose.
Has anybody ever lost a Blythe in the history of
No. Yeah.
No.
No.
Well, this could be our first win. Yeah,
Against
let's
me?
get fun. We just want to see if you're telling the truth.
Okay, well, before I take on you lowly challengers, you gotta get past someone. I can't just take every week.
Okay, whatever. I'm not.
Before I'll take you on, you've gotta defeat Johnny.
Okay, John.
Okay.
2 out of 3.
Why? Yes,
Alright, I'll give you 1 shot. You get 2 out of 3, you get 1 shot.
Okay.
But after that, I don't want to hear any whining and I don't want you to cry. I'm such a loser. Okay, ready? Slow down. You gotta slow your watch. This is the cadence. Are you with me? Watch me first, okay? I'll do it. Rock, paper, scissors, shoot. Okay. That's the speed. It's not. It's not. Can't go that fast. You gotta go my speed.
Roll.
Yeah.
Alright, ready?
I'm ready. Are you?
Yeah.
Rock, paper, scissors, shoot. Ha! I won.
No, 2
Really?
Yes, you
Really
see.
want more?
Come on.
He cheats.
I don't cheat. It's called the master.
You just use scissors both times.
Well, you think she'd figure that out if she was good enough to challenge me?
Just don't.
Go ahead, Blythe, say it. Mr. Bellamy, you're the best.
We were stupid image.
Whatever.
I mean,
Again, undefeated.
We
So-
should have chose blind.
Here's what happens. They don't use rock, paper, scissors. The founding fathers actually put a plan in place in case this happened. They said the House of Representatives will break the tie. So, Thomas Jefferson becomes president. That's not a surprise because we know Thomas Jefferson is the third president of the United States. Adams is the first term, one-term president. Just like Donald Trump was a one-term president. Adams, if he wanted to, could come back later and run again, just like Donald Trump, if he chooses to, can come back in 2024. He'll be really, really old, but he can if he chooses to. If people will vote for him, he can still become president because that would be his second term. So Jefferson wins. If you're Aaron Burr, how do you feel about the outcome of this election? It's not fair. By the way, was it fair? You followed the rules. It was fair. Just like my defeat of Blythe was a fair victory. She's not happy about it.
Blind.
It's probably destroying her whole day.
It's not very fair. It was blind.
yeah, we should have showed
Whatever. She defeated Johnny. She made Johnny look like a putz.
Yeah.
You're supposed to be a stud.
He
Anyway,
doesn't
So-
need blind.
Aaron Burr is mad. He's like, that's not fair. The system is broken. Okay, if there would have been a tie in the Electoral College this year, there wasn't, but if there would have been, just theoretically, and Joe Biden and Donald Trump have the same number of electoral votes, and the House of Representatives breaks the tie, who becomes president? To know this, you have to know which political party controls the House of Representatives. The Democrats control the House of Representatives right now. So who would be the president? Joe Biden would win. And Donald Trump's response would be, yeah, it's not fair. Now, in all fairness to Aaron Burr, it was rigged a little bit. Because it wasn't necessarily, I'm voting for Aaron Burr, I'm voting for Thomas Jefferson. There was some time in between when a couple of very influential and very powerful men used their influence and power to go to the members of the House of Representatives, and they said, actually Alexander Hamilton in particular says, vote for Thomas Jefferson. We're buddies, you gotta do what I tell you. I need you to vote for Thomas Jefferson. You owe me. Alexander Hamilton was a very, very influential person, one of the most powerful people in America. So when Hamilton says, vote for Jefferson, you owe me. I know you don't owe me anything, but vote for Jefferson and I'll owe you. So Alexander Hamilton is going around, not because he loves Thomas Jefferson, but because he doesn't love Aaron Burr. In fact, he hates Aaron Burr. Alexander Hamilton says that when he's trying to convince people to not vote for Burr, to cast their vote for Hamilton, his quote is that Burr is a dangerous man and one who ought not be trusted with the reins of government. His problem with Burr, actually, I think maybe was a good thing. Burr tended to waffle based on what would get him votes. I don't know if that's a bad thing or not. I really can't tell because I don't know the exact specifics of that election. I've never studied it that close. But don't you think a political candidate that will change their mind based on what the people want them to do, isn't that a good thing? Don't we want a president or a representative to do what we want them to do, even if it's not what they believe is right? That's why we elect them to represent us. So, we've got Donald Trump as the president, and he's like, oh, I love the White House. It's beautiful. White is a perfect color. But all of the American people are like, I think we should paint it gray. I'm tired of white. Shouldn't he paint it gray? If all of the American people are saying do it. So, I don't know. Thomas Jefferson and Aaron Burr have some qualities that are similar, but because Hamilton doesn't trust the guy, he has people vote against him. It actually goes a little bit more personal than that. A few years earlier, Alexander Hamilton's father-in-law, so his wife's dad, ran for a Senate seat against Aaron Burr and lost. So there's personal hatred, personal animosity between Aaron Burr and Alexander Hamilton. As a result of all of this, as a result of Hamilton using his power to get Jefferson elected, Burr becomes the vice president. He's mad about it. And eventually, in 1804, he challenges Alexander Hamilton to a duel. Like pistols. Like someone's gonna die. This is pretty serious stuff. This is old school stuff that's not even supposed to happen in history anymore. So Alexander Hamilton accepts the challenge of the duel. Now, by 1804, that's when this duel is going to take place, dueling was outlawed in New York. And that's where they were. Both men were in New York. If you're caught dueling, the punishment was execution. So it's a big crime. You're not supposed to do this. So they decided to hold their duel in New Jersey, where the punishment was still a big deal, but it wasn't death. The punishment for the crime was less in New Jersey than it was in New York. I'm not sure what it was, probably jail or fine. So the two men decided on July, 11th, I think, 1804, to meet in Weehawken, New Jersey. A small town out in the countryside. In fact, the site of their duel is the same site that 3 years earlier Alexander Hamilton's son was killed in a duel. So I'm not sure Hamilton really would want to go to that site. If that's a place where my son had been killed in a duel, I don't know if I want to go back. Now, there's a couple different views of how this duel goes down in history, and it's not really all that well recorded. So my story might be off just a little bit, but it's probably the most commonly accepted story of how this duel goes down. Usually in a duel, the person that's challenged gets to pick the weapons. In this instance, I don't think there was ever really any question that they were going to use pistols, but there is an example in the 1840s or 1850s, Abraham Lincoln was challenged to a duel. And since he's challenged, he picked the weapons. And Lincoln wasn't necessarily great with the pistol, and he really didn't want to fight the duel. And Lincoln was a big, strong, powerful man. So he chose the broadsword, like a big 15-pound sword. 15 pounds doesn't seem like much, but as you're wafting in through the air, first of all, if you hit something with it, it's going to cause massive damage. It's not like a little baby sword. It's a big sword. If you ever seen the movie Braveheart, Braveheart carries around a broadsword. It's a big, you wave that around, like chopping off heads with that sucker. It's big. As soon as Lincoln's opponent found out that he had chose the broadsword, he really quickly backed out and said, "Oh, I'm sorry, sir," and left because he didn't want to fight Lincoln. Lincoln knew that was going to happen. He outsmarted the guy. So in this instance, Hamilton chooses pistols. Now, fancy, wealthy people in the 17, 17, 1800s, sometimes the family had a set of dueling pistols. In fact, these are the same pistols that Hamilton's son was killed with. So Hamilton shows up with the pistols. Now, when a duel happens, there's a lot of formality to it. It's not like in the Old West and cowboy movies where they just go out into the street and they're like, their spurs are clanking and they're like, oh, whoever's quickest wins. First of all, remember how inaccurate weapons were at the time. So this is how it's going to go down. If I'm challenged, if Blythe challenges me to a duel, I bring the pistols. It's usually because someone's questioned my honor or her honor. I made fun of her because she's horrible at rock, paper, scissors, and you shouldn't feel bad because you lost to the best ever. You did make the job. So she challenges because I've questioned her integrity and her honor by defeating her. So I'm going to bring with me what's called a second. So Nadia is my friend. So she's going to come along, and Ella is Blythe's friend. So Ella is going to come along. And those two, they're not going to participate unless one of us breaks the rules. So for instance, we've already determined what time we're going to fire our pistols at each other. We've already determined that Ella is going to announce, "You may fire." If I pull my pistol out and I shoot at Blythe before that established time, it's Ella's job. She's got a gun also to gun me down. So they're kind of acting as referees. If Blythe shoots at me and wounds me before it's time, then it's Nadia's job to gun her down. So they also have other jobs. So I show up with the pistols. Alexander Hamilton shows up with the pistols. You're supposed to give the opponent the choice of which pistol they take. So they're exactly the same. They come in a nice fancy box. I open up the box, and I'm supposed to, probably Nadia's going to take care of this for me because I'm nervous. I'm crapping that I could be dead in a few minutes. So Nadia brings my dueling pistols to Blythe, or Blythe's second, Ella, because Blythe's nervous too, and says, pick your weapon. Now there's some question as to whether this ever happened, because some people believe Alexander Hamilton might have messed with his trigger a little bit. So on a handgun, on a pistol, there's a little screw on most pistols that you can adjust the pressure that you have to pull the trigger with. So some people believe that Hamilton messed with his trigger so that it would go off really easily. And he might have messed with Burr's trigger so that he had to pull really hard, which would slow him down, giving Hamilton an advantage. I don't know whether that part is true or not. Once Blythe has her pistol, and I have my pistol, our seconds, Nadia and Ella, they're going to load them. Because if I'm shaken and nervous, and we're not gunmen, we're actually politicians, so we're not really good at shooting anyway. They're going to take care of that so that it's done right. I have complete and total faith in Nadia, and Blythe trusts Ella. They take care of that. Then we establish rules. We're going to determine how far apart we are, and we're going to determine that Ella is going to announce fire, and that's the time when we can shoot. So they line themselves up at a distance apart from each other. They both have pistols. These are, by the way, really heavy dueling pistols. For two men that aren't used to guns, it probably would have been really awkward. And they're not very accurate, and they're far enough apart that they're probably not even going to hit each other. Remember, they only get one shot. It's not like a six-shooter. Bam, 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 bam. No. It's not like an AR, bam, 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 bam. No, it's one shot. In fact, there's a special stance for dueling. I know Thursday people, that hopefully you can hear it this time. I tried it already once with no audio. You can't see this, but instead of standing, like if I'm shooting a pistol today, I'm going to stand like this. I'm going to spread my legs a nice width, and I'm going to hold the gun in front of me nice and square. Instead of standing like this for a duel, you stand like this for a duel. Why? Yeah. This is a slightly narrower target than this. Not by a lot, because my belly sticks out a lot. But I'm narrower this way, so it's a smaller target for Blythe to be able to hit, or for Burr to be able to hit. So they stand sideways to each other. Once the order is given that they may fire, Alexander Hamilton, bam, shoots right away, missing Burr. It's said that people that witnessed it said there was a 3 to 4 second delay before Burr fired back. Why? Could be because of the trigger. Or Hamilton has already missed. Burr doesn't have to hurry. He can take his time, and Hamilton just has to stand there like waiting for the shot to come back. Now you're like 3 to 4 seconds. That's not much time. Really, it is. 1, 2, 3, 4. That's plenty of time to take aim and specifically be very cautious about hitting your target. Now, here's the thing. Most people agree that Hamilton did not ever intend to shoot Burr. Most duels by the early 1800s were just a matter of honor. So the fact that I showed up and you showed up and we were willing to do this, we're not going to leave this scene liking each other, but oftentimes it looks something like this. I just hold the pistol in the air. You hold your pistol up. We were both courageous enough and honorable enough to show up. We might even shake hands when it's done. Probably not, but that's it for now. Alexander Hamilton had told friends and probably his wife, I do not intend to harm Aaron Burr. So most likely when Hamilton fired right away, he missed on purpose. History Channel says he hit a branch some 12 feet above Aaron Burr's head. That guns are inaccurate, but not that inaccurate. Hamilton gets hit in the liver, so it goes right through here. Burr hits in the liver and the spine. So Hamilton is toast. The gut shot, you're gonna die. They put him on a boat, ferry him back across the river, and Alexander Hamilton dies. Aaron Burr's like, oh crap. By the way, Burr's the vice president of the United States. Just killed a man. So they're hunting him down. Burr goes and hides in South Carolina. Eventually, he's charged with murder. He's killed a man. Eventually goes back to Washington and finishes his term as vice president. He's never put on trial for killing Alexander Hamilton. Probably because they mutually agreed to do this. So it's murder, but not really. So Aaron Burr finishes it out. He's not asked to serve a second term as vice president, so Burr kind of goes nuts. In fact, prior to this, it was known that he wasn't going to serve a second term as vice president, so Burr kind of went and campaigned in New York, running for governor. And while running for governor, before he has a duel with Hamilton, Hamilton badmouths him enough that he loses the election for governor in New York. That's kind of what really kicked off this feud to start the duel. It wasn't even the presidential election. That made him mad, but now it's like, you're ruining my life, man. And that's where the duel comes from. After this, after he finishes his term as VP, and after he loses the governorship of New York, he heads out west, and some people believe Aaron Burr tried to start his own country. The guy was nuts. Tried to start his own country in Louisiana Territory with the French. Doesn't have any success doing that. Ends up coming home. This is kind of funny. He marries a woman. At the age of 77, he marries a 56-year-old woman. I guess they're both kind of old, so that's not really that big of a deal. They're married for 4 months. She's a wealthy widower, so her husband had passed away and left her a big pile of money. After 4 months, she gets tired of him because he's spending all of her money, so she asks for a divorce. She hires a divorce attorney. Her divorce attorney's name? Alexander Hamilton Jr. So poor Aaron Burr is haunted by this Hamilton guy for his whole life, for the things that he's not able to do, and even later because of his divorce with his wife. Hamilton is involved, and she probably chose him for that fact that she knew that it was going to work out in her favor. So it's quite a story. It's almost ridiculous. Could you imagine, if people were challenged to duels today for questioning the integrity and honor of a person? Can you imagine the scene of Joe Biden and Donald Trump out somewhere in the forest having a pistol duel? Would you pay for the pay-per-view for that?
Yeah.
I don't really want to see a real human getting killed, but I might actually want to watch that because it would probably be kind of funny watching those two wolfhards trying to shoot each other. I don't know if either one of them have ever shot a gun. They probably have, but I don't know that for sure. So, anyway, so there's some stuff that's going on besides the Aaron Burr stuff. When Jefferson takes office, so when he steps into the White House and he sits down at the desk and he cracks his back and pops his neck and he cracks his knuckles and he's like, yeah, I'm ready to get started. On his first day at work, there was a big pile of papers on his desk. He's like, what the crap is this? So he starts looking them over. And all the way up to midnight on John Adams' last night as president, he's doing presidential stuff. He's not taking any time off. I would guess we'll see some of this happening with President Trump on January 19th, so his last day in office. I'm going to guess President Trump's going to be pretty active. He's not going to be like cleaning stuff and cleaning out his desk. He's going to be doing stuff. For instance, the president has the power to pardon criminals. So if Donald Trump has any buddies that are in jail, he'll let them out. That's not a Donald Trump thing. That's every president has done that. Some of them on bigger levels than others. Or if it's possible for Donald Trump to appoint judges to the court system, he's going to appoint them because Donald Trump is going to pick people that are Republican. If he doesn't fill those vacancies, they're going to be replaced with Democrats because it's a different political party coming in. So he's going to be very active. Well, John Adams, all the way up to midnight, was appointing federal judges. And these are judgeships that serve life terms. So once they're in office, they're there until they die or retire, sort of like Supreme Court justices. So John Adams appointed 60-some federal judges. Most of them were signed off, and most of them were delivered their contract before Jefferson took office. He gets into office, and he's like, what the heck are these? And he finds a pile of these judgeships whose appointments or contracts were never delivered. So he tells James Madison, his Secretary of State, ignore these, don't deliver them. Because he didn't want a bunch of judges that Adams had appointed. He wants to appoint his own judges. So one of those judges was a man named William Marbury. So he sues in the Supreme Court James Madison, the Secretary of State, who was supposed to deliver the contract. This kind of happened to me, sort of. When I was first hired here, the guy that I interviewed with, I can't remember what his name was, but he hired me, and then he got fired. So the principal of this school hired me, then he gets fired. And he had told me when he hired me, we'll send you a contract in a couple of weeks. The contract is actually what makes the job real, binding, meaning you have the job. So I wait like a month and I still haven't received a contract. So I'm like getting a little nervous. So I called the school and I said, can I please speak, Mr. Grob was his name. Can I speak to Mr. Grob? And the secretary says, he doesn't work here anymore. And I was like, are you serious? Do I even have a job there? And the secretary was like, well, let me look into it. So she called back a little later. Yep, you've been hired. We just haven't sent the contract. But that was kind of the case because the guy that hired me was no longer working here. So I was worried that I didn't even have a job. So Jefferson ends up winning the court case, but it's kind of under strange circumstances. The Secretary of State for John Adams was a guy named Marshall. Well, at the same time as he's leaving the office of the Secretary of State, he's appointed to the Supreme Court. So one of Adams' guys is going to be making the decision as to whether Jefferson has to give these lawyers, these judges, their judgeships. But this is the first time in history, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time on Marbury versus Madison because it's dull. This is the first time in history where we see the Supreme Court demonstrating something called judicial review, which means the Supreme Court, even though they would have probably supported John Adams, looks at these appointments and decides that it's unconstitutional. Therefore, Jefferson wins. Therefore, Marbury never becomes a federal judge. So what we see, and the real purpose in even talking about Marbury versus Madison, is we see the third branch of government, the judicial branch, has enough authority and enough power to say no, not going to happen. It's kind of an interesting thing. There's lots of other times in history we've seen this happen too. I've got a whole list of them here. The yellow here, I want to talk about this briefly. Very, very rare that there's 9 judges on the Supreme Court today. There could be 20. They can add more tomorrow if they choose to. But there's 9 justices on the Supreme Court. It's very rare that one president gets to pick 3 of them because their term is for life. Donald Trump has selected 3 Supreme Court justices. One of them, Amy Coney Barrett, was chosen right before the election. Why was Trump in such a hurry to replace or to put Amy Coney Barrett on the Supreme Court before the election?
Because he didn't want to get, he wanted a Republican on the court before in case he wasn't reelected.
Yeah, and it's really a big deal because she replaced Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who was a Democrat. So it changed the balance of power. And Amy Coney Barrett will probably serve on the Supreme Court for 25 years. For those of you that are on QuickTime or YouTube watching this, Blight said it's because he wanted a Republican on the Supreme Court. He didn't want to risk losing the election and having Biden choose the next justice, which would have happened. So if a Supreme Court justice dies in January, Biden gets to pick. Or if a Supreme Court justice retires, Biden's going to get to pick. So during his 4 years, very unusual in a one-term presidency, Donald Trump picked 3 Republican justices. So his legacy will live way beyond January 19th, his last day in office. It will live for the next 20 or 25 years because the men and women that he put on the court are going to be there for a long, long time. So when you pick Supreme Court justices, you pick people that are of your political party, and you pick people that are super smart, and you pick people that are relatively young, but not too young. So Barrett, I believe she's like 50-ish. The 2 other men that he put on the Supreme Court, 50-ish. And they're not going to retire when they're 55. He wants people that are going to work until they're old. So Supreme Court justices usually work well into their 70s. But they don't ever have to quit. So it was a big deal that the president did that. 3 times Donald Trump got to do that. Other judicial review cases, Dred Scott was a slave case. Plessy versus Ferguson and Brown versus Board of Education were school cases with race. Miranda, you've heard of the Miranda rights, like you have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and be used against you in a court of law. That's a Supreme Court decision. Roe versus Wade, a 7-2 decision that allows abortion. So Bush versus Gore actually determined the president in the election of 2000 because they had issues with the vote count in Florida. So lots of issues with that. Judicial review just means the Supreme Court gets to choose things based on whether the Constitution gives them the power or not. And a radical is a person who stirs up issues, and they tend to be extreme. So if you watch the news ever, there are some radicals in our government today. It doesn't necessarily mean they're bad people. It just means that their ideas are big. So when we talked in class maybe a month ago about the difference between the political parties, and I said Democrats that are extreme are way over there, and Republicans that are extreme are way over there, and most of us are somewhere in the middle. Radicals are the ones that are out there. In the Congress today, if you've ever heard of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez or Ilhan Omar, those are radical Democrats. Their ideas are extreme. To most people that are in the middle, their extreme ideas are not at all attractive. To some people, yeah, what the heck, let's make some major changes. So those people still exist today. All right, we'll move on to some fun stuff since we talked about death and destruction and gore. All right, the Louisiana Purchase. This is kind of some sneaky stuff going on. Originally, France owned Louisiana Territory. So they had control of Canada all the way down through Louisiana Territory. But during the French and Indian War, which was actually between the French and the British, France secretly gave Louisiana Territory to the Spanish because they didn't want it to fall into the hands of the British if they happened to lose. So Spain owned Louisiana Territory. Well, in a secret treaty, the Spanish gave it back to the French. Spain knew they couldn't defend it if there was ever a war, and Spain didn't really want it because they discovered that Louisiana Territory was kind of grassy farmland made for cows and corn. And Spain really was interested for about 200 years in looting gold and silver and jewels from the areas that they'd gone into, and there's not a lot of gold and silver and jewels in Louisiana Territory. So Spain kind of had enough anyway, not to mention they weren't really powerful enough. So they gave it to a French dictator named Napoleon Bonaparte. As soon as the Spanish gave the French Louisiana Territory, and by the way, America was kicking nervous about this because we thought the French would have a presence in North America, and Napoleon was looking to expand his empire. We were worried that he might even try to take parts of America. So Thomas Jefferson, the president, gets nervous, and he sends James Madison to France to work out a deal with Napoleon. He says, James Madison, go to France, and I want you to purchase New Orleans. So here's a $10 million check. By the way, Congress has the checkbook. The House and the Senate, they're the ones that appropriate money for stuff. Go to France and just buy this. I'm sorry, Thursday people, you can't see, but I'm pointing at an area that would be New Orleans. Because if we owned New Orleans, we could control the mouth of the Mississippi River. We can still use it for trade. So Madison had no intentions of buying the whole thing. He's just told, here's $10 million bucks. Let's get the city of New Orleans, the port, the mouth of the Mississippi, the most important city in North America, potentially. So Madison's got the check in his pocket. He's headed to France. About 2 days before Madison arrives, because remember, this is going to take weeks to get across the ocean, Charles de Talleyrand, the French foreign minister for Napoleon, calls in an American minister and says, I want to sell you the whole thing. What would you give us? And the guy's like, I don't know. So Madison shows up in France, and he's like, I need to meet with Napoleon. And Napoleon sits down, and they're having some tea and cookies and maybe some Pop-Tarts. And Napoleon says, I've got a proposition for you, Madison. And Madison's like, yep, need to talk to you too. And he's got this $10 million check in his pocket. And he's ready to say, I want to purchase New Orleans for $10 million. But before he can say that, Napoleon says, would America be interested in buying all of Louisiana territory? They don't even really know how big it is. They just know it's gigantic. For $15 million. He has permission to spend 10 to buy a city. But he's offered for only $5 million more an area of land that will double the size of the United States. That's a no-brainer, right? So what's the problem? He only has permission to spend $10 million. This would be like if Michaela, mom gives you her credit card. You're going to the mall with the girls. Right? That'd be fun. Mom's credit card. And you're like, Mom, can I get some new pants? I need some new pants. All my pants are wore out. And Mom says, yep, you can spend $40 on my credit card. $40. Well, that'll buy pants, but okay. Thanks, Mom. See ya. And you get to the store and you go to Hollister. I can't go in there, it always smells too bad, like too much cologne or something. You go into Hollister, they have girl clothes, right? Is it just
Yeah.
You go there and you're looking at the pants, and then all of a sudden the clouds part, the sun comes out, and angels begin to sing. Oh. You see the most beautiful pair of pants you've ever seen in your life. And you put them on, and they fit perfectly, and you even feel lighter when you walk. It's like you're bouncing on the moon. It's like you have tasted the dew off the unicorn's horn on a Sunday afternoon in June. They are the most perfectest pants you've ever seen in your life. They're $90 pants, and they're on sale for $60. But Mom only gave you permission to spend $40. What do? Your cell phone's dead, by the way, so you can't call Mom and get permission to spend $20 more. Do we spend the money and risk taking off Mom, and she may never give you the credit card again? But knowing that she's going to be happy that you got these amazing flipping pants? Or do we just not take the risk and go to Walmart and get some $40 ones?
You can just pay her back.
In my mind, that's what I'm thinking. I'm going to spend the $60 because if I go home, my mom's reasonable enough to know I really wanted these pants. And I'm going to tell her, Mom, I don't have the $20 right now, but next time I babysit, I'll give you the extra $20. If you did that, what would Mom's response most likely be?
Okay, good.
You should have called me first, but, okay. Your phone was dead, really? Why didn't you use Blythe's phone? I didn't think about it. I was too excited about these pants. They were awesome. Like licking the dew off the unicorn's horn on a Sunday afternoon in June. So that's the decision that Madison makes. He comes back to America and he's like, bam, Jefferson's going to be so happy. He sits down with Jefferson and Jefferson's like, how did it go in France? And he's like, well, do you want the good news or the bad news? And Jefferson's like, the good news. He goes, I bought the whole thing. He's like, you mean all of Louisiana Territory? And Madison's like, yeah! And Jefferson's like, what's the bad news? I spent more than you told me I could spend. Congress is ticked. We didn't give you permission. You don't have the power, because they're fighting over the branches of government and how much power they have. We've got the checkbook. You can't just do that. And then they're like, but it was 3 cents an acre. It was such a smoking deal. I had to buy the land. And Congress is like, oh, we're mad, but okay, it was really a good deal. I would have done it too. That's the response that most of us would get from Mama Bear. That's the response I would give if one of my children did the same thing. At first, I would be upset because I didn't let you spend that extra 20. But then when I see how nice of pants they are, and you offer to pay me back the 20, I'm not upset anymore. So we doubled the size of the United States for $15 million. It was a smoking deal. Napoleon needed the money because he was fighting a war with the British. So it just so happened that, by the way, we're broke, so $15 million was a lot of money for us. But it was just so happened we were in exactly the right place at exactly the right time to get a great deal. Not only did we double the size of the United States, but it pushes France and Spain out of our way. We don't have to worry about them anymore. So it's an awesome thing for all people involved. Can't beat it. Great deal. So ultimately, for those of you on Thursday that are watching this, we were trying to buy this, and we got all of this. Now, this is a map that shows the Lewis and Clark expedition, which takes off in 1804, from St. Louis, Missouri, and arrives back in St. Louis 2 years later. When Lewis and Clark were first hired by Thomas Jefferson to go on this expedition, they didn't know what was out there. They had no idea what they were going to encounter because there were very few explorers had ever been there. So Jefferson wants them to go out and map it, figure out what kind of plants and animals there are, figure out if there's any mineral wealth, and even more importantly, they're looking for a water route to the Pacific, a way to take ships across North America. Does that exist? What happens when you take the Mississippi, the biggest river? It flows into the Missouri and then eventually run into the mountains. Is there a water route across North America? Prior to this, the only way you could ship stuff to the Pacific was all the way around South America. Long and dangerous. So Jefferson wanted a water route. Does it appear there is one? No. Today, the quickest way to ship stuff is right here. There's a canal. Panama Canal. Did that exist in 1804? No. We have the technology to do that yet. So that's what they're looking for. Here's the kick in the pants. When Jefferson hired these guys, it was still French territory, so they were sent on an expedition that would have been considered trespassing and could have been considered an act of war. But by the time 1804 rolls around, France had turned it over to the United States because of the $15 million deal. So it ended up being a great deal for us. These men take off to do all this mapping. They take off with a group called the Corps of Discovery. We're going to skip, there's 2 videos here. We can come back on Friday and play those, but we're not going to do them today. And of all of the men that went with them to explore this territory, 2 years walking, going through hostile Native American territory, going through territory filled with bears and creepy things like chupacabras and Sasquatches. 1 person dies. It's like a Christmas miracle, but only 1 person dies. In fact, he died not far from here. Lewis and Clark were here. It's possible that Lewis and Clark were standing exactly where I'm standing, because they traveled along the Missouri River all the way through most of Nebraska. So they were here. They were in Fort Calhoun. We know that they built a camp there. Then they traveled through. So they might have been right here. In fact, some of the ways that we can tell where they were is because we can uncover where they pooped. And I'll explain how they can tell where Lewis and Clark were by their poop to Friday. It's kind of funny, actually. Weird but funny. But we like weird and funny stuff in here. So they very well may have been here working out trade deals with Native Americans. About 30 or 40 miles north of here, if you take Interstate 29 to South Sioux City, or to Sioux City, if you go into Iowa and take the interstate north, off to the right-hand side up on top of a hill, there's like a pointy-looking statue, an obelisk. It's the shape. That's a monument to the man that died. It's a monument to Sergeant Charles Floyd. You're like, is there a cool story? Was he shot by an Indian? No. Did he get mauled by a bear? No, not in Iowa. How did he die, Mr. Bellamy? That's a great question, students. His appendix burst. So Charles Floyd would have died no matter if he was in a hospital in St. Louis or in the middle of the Missouri River in Iowa. He was going to die from that anyway. You don't survive a burst appendix back then. Even today it can be deadly. So no casualties except for Sergeant Charles. They had lots of sickness, lots of disease, but they had medicine, which we'll talk about on Friday. So about 1806, they returned to St. So they left St. Louis in 1804. About a year and a half later, they get where they're going. Then it takes them another year to come home, with almost no communication between them and Thomas Jefferson. So William Clark was a military guy, and a map maker, and he knew about boats, so he's got some skills. Lewis was a smart guy, a scholar, a botanist, which means he knew about plants, a doctor, so he was good with medicine, and again, we'll talk about what kind of medicine later, and he was a good buddy of Thomas Jefferson. So he was actually Thomas Jefferson's personal secretary. That's why he was picked. He picks William Clark to be co-captains of this expedition. William Clark is the nephew of George Rogers Clark, who had fought the British in the American Revolution on the frontier. So these guys are well connected. That's how they get the job. And they're supposed to map animals, plants, and Indians, see who's friendly, see who's not, see what resources we just purchased. So that's it for today. There is an Otis. How did I do on our 55-minute timeline?
You're at 10:40.
That's pretty close. I don't remember what time we were supposed to be. So 10:50. So I did pretty good. So I want you to work on that Otis assignment, the 6 questions. Do your bestest. Do it again if you need to. I'm not sure if I've got it set up to grade it correctly or not, but just do it and get it done, and we'll reconvene on Friday.